I'm Samantha Jew, the director and founder of Platform, and today I have Murphy, who is one of the organizers at Queer Enough. And Reagan will be joining us shortly. She's having a little more problems with getting into her computer. So, Murph, let's just start with our discussion for today, which is about social identities. And I guess one of the very first questions that I want to ask you is, what are some of the social identities that people will want to impose on you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first I just want to say thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to be here. And since birth, as soon as I was born, I was assumed female at birth. And that social identity and construct was definitely the first and really the strongest that I have been identified with throughout my life. I am non-binary. I don't identify as female, but it took me 28 years of my life to be able to unpack that and know what that tension that I felt was. So that's definitely one of them. I grew up in a big old Irish Catholic family in Philadelphia. So there's
non-binary and Irish Catholic family. How interesting is that?
I know, yeah. Should we bring in a therapist? Or?
Yes, we should have a therapist.
Totally. So I'm white, U.S. citizen, Irish Catholic, lower middle class. We grew up. My dad works for a steel industry. My mom's a nurse. My grandparents came over from Ireland on my mom's side. So there's like a whole bunch of different identities imposed onto me. I was more athletic than intelligent. I have ADHD, so that's another one that I've been marked as throughout my life that I had to learn to figure out and navigate that. So there's just so many different ways that I am perceived or told that I need to be, just in that right there.
I'm curious, because we're going to come back to the non-binary identity, which is very important in this conversation. Mm-hmm. But what I want to touch upon is the very categories that you have selected. Why didn't you talk about your eye color, the height, your mm-hmm. feet size, your hand size, whether you like chocolate as opposed to, in other words, there are different ways in which we categorize people. Mm-hmm. We could talk about like short people.
Yes, which I am.
Yeah, but we don't use, it's interesting. My brother talks about how short he is all his life. It's never been an issue with me, nor has it been a category by which I describe myself, because it's not top of my list. Mm-hmm. Where does these social identity or categories, where do you think they come from? And why are you choosing those categories that you just selected right now? Irish Catholic, white, all of this. What does it say about the categories we created?
Right. Well, I feel like they're the most important for me in order to navigate the world or understand.
Which world?
Good question. The U.S. Really, yeah. I mean, my context is right now anyway in the United States and has been for the majority of my life. So it's my own perspective it's my own lens to see the world. And also in terms of navigating all of the different systems of like healthcare, academia, the economics, the economy, and financial institutions of like when I'm navigating salary, for example, for a job, when I'm going to the bathroom, these are all markers that make, or that I'm aware of, so that I act a certain way in the world.
Which is interesting, because I will not go around describe myself non-ADHD. Mm-hmm. Whereas you describe yourself as ADHD. It's a category, because we consider it to be that almost like a disability, not an ability.
Right. It's a disadvantage in theory. Yes. In a very certain context. of mostly the institutions where I operate,
Mm-hmm.
or that, you know, yeah, as a US citizen, of the different ways that I operate in this world. But yeah, it's assumed, like for some folks, they don't feel like they have to announce their pronouns because you're just going to get them right. So it's already like I have to announce something because something's different about me that's going to not let me fit into the system perfectly.
It's interesting. Because I'm very androgynous,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go, and I have very short hair. And so I would go into the women's bathroom. And a few times I had people call me. I was like, "You're going into the wrong side." And I would look at them thinking, "Why do you feel the need to tell me that I'm going to the wrong side based
Mm-hmm.
upon how I'm dressed, my haircut?"
Totally.
Um, and I've been called sir or him a lot.
Me too. Yeah.
And it was just confusing for me in terms of, I wish we had common pronouns in which there's no gender,
Yeah.
because it's so disorienting for people to be called a him or her if you identify with one
Mm-hmm.
gender. To be called the opposite gender is always, how would I say it? It's demoralizing sometimes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I not dressed appropriately? Is my haircut not appropriate for you? Is my voice sound not indicative of what you consider to be consistent with my gender?
Right. It's an indication in a way that you don't belong. There's something about you that doesn't quite
It.
belong in that space.
And so what's interesting is when I was growing up, we had limited um, categories. You're
Mm-hmm.
either male or female. So non-binary was not even, or you're transgender, you know what I mean? In other words, you're not, there's no non-binary was not a category.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, do you know historically when non-binary was a category that was created?
It first started to become a category, I believe, in the 1990s. I didn't know about it until probably 2014, 2015.
So very recently
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that
It's,
you felt it.
yes. Yeah. And someone else, I overheard a conversation between somebody else telling me or saying that I was probably someone who identifies as non-binary. And I just didn't, well, I wasn't supposed to be in the conversation, but I went home and Googled that immediately. And I could just feel as I'm going through and Googling and finding people who have feelings that I felt or have resonated with some part of my story. And I was just ingesting this language and these identities. And I felt like I was sweating and had like a pit in my stomach as I was uncovering this whole other world that it turns out I ended up identifying within, or I don't know, it's hard to identify within like gender non-conforming because it's not, there isn't one way to do it. I mean, there's no one way to be a woman either, or
There's
a man.
no, this is the part that I want to discuss with you, Murph, because I think it's important. We talk about accepting our identities, but how can we accept identities that has been defined by one segment of the community in which they say you need to be X, Y, and Z to be female, ABC to be male, and you know what I mean? So we're needing to talk about that. Reagan, are you online right now? Reagan, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Can you
There
hear
we
me
go.
now?
Yes.
Okay.
Reagan, are you familiar with non-binary identity?
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about non-binary identity. And
Okay.
so the reason why this touches upon a lot of issues for me is the fact that Asian was not really even a category for me. Hybrid identities, what it means, whether it be African American, Korean American, Chinese American, all of this was not a box I could check off.
Mm-hmm.
When I apply for jobs or when I apply to universities, they would have these social categories, you know, male, female, and what race are you, what ethnicity are you. And so they're not, the boxes didn't apply to a lot of how I saw myself. And so the question now is this: how did non-binary, like what needed to be done to include non-binary, all these hybrid identities? And now I think society is changing in which we now need to include mixed identities, you know what I mean? In terms of, there's a lot of people who are of mixed racial and ethnic backgrounds, and so they can't put white, they can't put Latina. There's limit in terms of what they're able to mark off. Mm-hmm. And then even within the queer community, you have intersex and asexual. And so the list keeps increasing. Mm-hmm. What's going on, you think?
I think it has just, in some ways, resonated with so many people, whether that's race, gender, sexuality, of realizing there's a whole world or a way of identifying or being in the world that isn't prescribed, that we can kind of, I don't even want to say like put on, because that doesn't do justice to the identities, but of just like understanding yourself in a more uncategorized way that's outside of the boxes, right? We notice that like, oh, we're in the boxes because we're told to be in the boxes, and we weren't given an option. And then when you take down a wall or two, then you're like, why can't we take down the other walls? Because these don't fit any of us. They're not helping us.
So you're saying the categories are very limiting.
Absolutely.
But isn't it confusing?
Yes, it's messy.
It's very confusing for us not to be able to put everyone in boxes. How can we take the census if we have 1,000 possibilities for gender?
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so the question is, we've created these boxes. And now
I feel like we've inherited them though.
We've been created, we've inherited them, and we're constantly changing them. Mm-hmm. So if this is a construct that's constantly changing, I want to ask Murph and Reagan this question. Why is it important to accept your identities if it's always changing and if it's not completely reflective of who you are?
Mm-hmm. Reagan, do you feel inspired to answer first?
Sure.
Hey, you go for it.
That's a difficult question. I guess, I don't know. I guess I haven't thought about it in that way before, necessarily. That, I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want you to, Reagan, we're going to come back to you. I want you to think about all the different social identities that you have. And I want you to think about whether it's just you don't even think about them or you accept them. But do you really understand and know what the meaning of those identities are? Murph, so you get to answer it first. Why is it important to accept these identities if you're constantly negotiating what it is that you are in terms of what it means to be non-binary, what it means to be white in America? You're constantly negotiating, trying to understand what that means. Mm-hmm. And I'm asking you, why is it important to accept it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, well, I think there's a few reasons. One is because basic survival, right? You have to know how you are perceived in order to, like, for a woman, for example, in order to know that you're not being paid justly, perhaps, for the job you're doing, or if you're Black and walking down the street, if you're a woman and walking down the street, if you're walking down the street, like negotiating the space and like how to be safe and how to access resources that lead us to survive in this world. But I think it also is important because it gives you it, once you know how you are classified by these boxes, by the dominant at more advantage society, then you can also, you can say, okay, this is what's dominant, I am not considered what's dominant, and begin to sort of break that apart and debunk it in a way, expand it. And then for just another reason of just like finding people who will support you and who resonate with you. Like when I heard the term non-binary and I went online and started Googling this, and I found people that I was like, oh, you're someone who I look up to. You're someone that I am learning from.
Shared experiences.
Shared experiences, yeah.
To feel less lonely and isolated in the society, because it's such a, for me, it's very new, mind you, because I, like when I heard asexual, really new to me, very new. And so I think, because it reflects my age, I think more than anything. And I'm always constantly, rethinking all the different categories we've sort of come to adopt naturally. Female, male, what I mean? Saying, oh, I have a vagina, so I'm a female. Well, what in the world makes you think that vagina equals gender?
Right.
Reagan, did you understand Murph? Do you agree with Murph or?
Yeah, I agree. I think it does give us a sense of belonging, and it gives
What a
us
great
a
word,
place that we feel safe to go to this place, that there's other people like us. We know that we're not alone. And so I think it lets us connect with other people.
And I think it makes you aware of the power dynamics within that society, right? All these categories we created, not blue eye as opposed to brown eye, okay? The categories we are creating in society shows the power dynamics. And to the extent power dynamic is that we put value on those who are at the intersection of what's acceptable, meaning white, straight, male, middle class, heterosexual, all that. And anyone who does not fit that category are those who we would consider to be the marginalized. And the messaging is, if you're not this and you are that, you're less worthy. So when America Ferrera, in terms of her TED Talk, talked about my identity is my superpower, she's undoing the messaging that she has heard all her life, meaning you are Latina, you're short, you're fat, you're poor, all the things in society we've deemed to be less worthy. Until you are able to negotiate what that means and accept it and own up to it and say, screw you, yeah, I am short, what the hell does it matter, I am fat. Like this notion of skinniness, our standard of beauty, which is predominantly white, blonde, blue-eyed, right? If we don't fit that, then you are less worthy. And we're saying, by accepting it and being very proud of that, we're saying, oh, I am all that, and I am worthy, even though I'm not that. So we have to undo the messaging that society is enforcing on us. So the question is, why is it so hard for us to say, I am a woman, I'm queer? And some people, some Black women and men who can pass are even afraid to say that they're Black, right? Because their skin color is light and they think they could pass. And they continue to do so. Invisible identities like being queer, we're afraid to come out because we could still hide. So what is it that prevents us from being fully who we are and accepting the person that we our authentic selves can be? What's preventing us from getting there?
I think that something that's preventing us is fearing the judgment of other people. or that society is not going to accept us of who we are, or not wanting to put ourselves out there.
Murph?
Yeah, I think Reagan is spot on. Is there's a fear of rejection, a fear of being othered, being alone, being isolated, being made fun of in many ways. Yeah, it's definitely a fear, and I think it's also having, like, part of it is you know, when you don't know, when you're living in these boxes, it's hard to know what it feels like to live outside of those boxes in a way too, which again is fear, but there's
Well, it's unknown.
it's unknown. Yeah, it's scary.
Because we are socialized to talk, like you say, talk to women this way, talk to men that way, talk to animals in a certain way, right? So once we are socialized into acting and talking a certain way, and we're now in no man's land in the sense that we don't know how to interact with a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Except we know how to deal with categories of people, not with people. And it's not just personal rejection. We're talking about what America's talking. We're talking about financial. You can't get jobs if you're queer. You can't get jobs if you're authentic, and if you're really Black, and I mean if you are authentically Latina, right? You can't get jobs. So it's bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is it worth it to be authentic yourselves when you can't get the job, when you can't get the date, when you can't get the promotion? We're talking about hardcore obstacles. We're not just talking about, oh, someone said something mean to me, which is, again, also problematic, but it's larger and greater than just small microaggressions. Is it worth it? Reagan, I'm going to come to you, so be prepared. Murph?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Especially when like my own quality of life and the way that I inhabit my body and in my body changed so drastically once I began to question my various different identities. But also when I'm looking to the folks coming behind me of what kind of legacy I want to leave for the world, it does a huge injustice for the non-binary kids coming up behind me that wouldn't be able to live their authentic selves either. And also for the folks who came before me and laid this groundwork so that I could even understand this identity. It just doesn't help the evolution of humans, especially in the United States.
Even with all the costs, you say it's worth it.
Yes. I wouldn't be living a life that I wanted if I hadn't had the opportunities to start questioning these identities and breaking them down.
Oh, just so American.
Thank you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not sure if that's a compliment right now.
No, it's Reagan, we'll talk about it. Reagan, what do you think?
I think it's worth it, because once you put yourself out there, even if you might be scared to, I think it also gives someone else a person to look up to, and more people will start doing it because they saw that you did it, and it will start to become more normal.
Wow, the word normal, what a thought. Since Murph is on a rush, I'm actually going to ask you one question both. What identity are you most afraid of sharing with other people? What is the category that you fear the most, that you'll get the most rejection from others? We're talking about not your friends. It could be. We're talking about the larger community.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to reveal anything you don't want to share with our community, but I'm just curious, and I want to know why you think that is the category that scares you the most.
For me, it's definitely gender.
Gender? Okay.
Yeah, you kind of added me with the America thing too. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, it's gender without a doubt.
Okay, your gender.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one that's most confused and most, I think, people reject you for, you think.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells you in terms of the messaging we receive from society.
Mm-hmm.
You don't call about your whiteness, it's your gender. Okay.
Absolutely.
Reagan, what about you?
I'm not sure. I guess that it would, I don't know if this is one, but I would say, I know in school I'm very quiet sometimes and I don't always speak my opinion, but I'm actually an extrovert and I like being around people, but people, like my teacher was like just kind of saying like, oh, you're an introvert, and I'm like, I don't really feel like an introvert. So just like having people kind of tell me what I am, kind of, even though it may not pertain to that situation, I guess.
Reagan, I'm curious, do you think that's connected to your gender? Introvert, extrovert, in terms of expectation of what a woman should be? Do you think it has to do with what a good student is supposed to be? Do you think, what is it that is connected to, you think? Your extrovert personality and why people might shy away from that description of you?
I think it might have something to do with gender roles, in that in the past, like say like the woman would stay at home and she wouldn't really go out, and she would be kind of like the homemaker, where the men would be going out. I think we're like straying away from those gender norms, I guess. And so, yeah, I guess it does.
Yeah. I wanted to think about all these things because I think it's important. The very identity that we are most afraid to claim is the one that society burdens us with the worst messages. And also that contradicts or conflicts with other identities that we might have. And it is important to explore it, because without exploring it, you cannot come to your self-esteem. And that's the key thing. Acceptance is not about accepting the categories. Accepting is undoing the messaging society has, and not to internalize that self-hatred and come to believe that you are okay as you are, period, whatever that may be. And that builds up our self-esteem. We cannot engage the world if we think crappy thoughts about ourselves. We just can't. And it is worthwhile, because we might make more money having superficial categories that we created for ourselves, but down the road, it's going to kill you. It's going to eat you alive. And that money is going to be worth crap. The success and fame. I want to thank you both. Appreciate Murph for being here in this space. And Reagan, as always, I appreciate your presence as well. So this will be the end of our discussion on social identities.